Hello, I'm Charlotte Nash. I'm a current CDA student, that's Collaborative Doctoral Award PhD student with Kent University and the British Museum. And my second year of my PhD is just starting, and it's all about the dissemination of glass bangles across the Western Indian Ocean trade network between the 13th and 18th century Common Era. And today I'm going to be talking about a specific aspect of that, which is analysing the glass bangles from the Middle East to establish a likely primary production location of their dissemination. So all about the scientific and methodological approaches, my progress, and the next stages. So there's quite a few different elements to this PhD that I can't talk about now, but of all the aspects, I'm going to be focusing on the typology, which is to sort my objects into a style typology, much like pots are organised into, to hopefully work out a chronology and regional provenance, and an analytical aspect, scientific aspect, which is looking at the glass chemical signatures to work out whether primary production locations correlate with these secondary production locations to create the style bangles. So I hope that makes sense. And I am focusing on the Siraf collection from the British Museum. Siraf being a very wealthy trade hub in the Gulf region around the 9th century on the Iranian coast. However, my particular collection seems to be dating between the 12th and 15th century CE. So that's a bit of background on that. If you do wish to know a bit more about the other aspects of my PhD, such as the interpretation and how they may indicate things on changing in society, culture, personal identity, that kind of thing, at the end I will give out my academia and ResearchGate details, which shows that kind of study and also links through to videos and presentations on those aspects on my YouTube channel, so if that's of interest. So firstly, I've been looking at the past studies that have been published either on glass bangles or relating to whether they're archaeological reports that mention glass bangles of this period. And first of all, what was notable is that they do roughly go into 5 regional categories of glass production, which, as you can see, the western part of the Middle East is very heavily represented in Egypt and along the Eastern Mediterranean, two historically prevalent regions, of course, of early glass production, which continue to be heavy glass producers into this period. And the Gulf region and South Asia are two sparsely studied regions, I would say. Now, on my map, and you can see I've put Siraf in there, on my map, the Gulf region looks like it has had more studies than it has, purely because I have also included those that I know are currently being looked at and those that I'm aware of that I would like to look at. South Asia also heavily underrepresented, but I'm really pleased to say that recent studies have just been published on South Asian glass and also bangles, and there are ongoing studies that I am aware of on this region that I think are going to bring a lot to the overall picture of glass bangles and their dissemination in this period. So really excited about that. But my focus, of course, is going to be the Gulf region primarily, understanding what bangles are being produced when in this region, and then contextualizing with the use of existing studies into other regions. So something I should say, of course, is that when it comes to the analytical approach, I've first of all got to understand glass manufacturing techniques, the history, what's known of glass making and furnace locations in the Middle East, and then also the scientific understanding of glass, which is all to do with how I'm going to analyse them with XRF and SEM primarily, to identify common chemical signatures within certain regions. From this, I hope to create a coding system which helps to identify whether or not there is a connection between the primary production of the glass and the secondary production of the bangles. Thankfully, I am not a scientist, I must say, and thankfully I was allowed to partake in the MA module by Dr. Ian Freestone of UCL last year on glass and glazes, to give me an absolutely fantastic primer on understanding historical glass and how to analyse glass. And without it, I must say that I do not think I would have been able to have done what I have already managed to achieve, and also just undertaken this PhD in such a way. So I'm really grateful for that. So I talked about creating a typology. There's actually 3 stages of coding in my PhD proposal. The first is on the left, you've got the typology, which is fully developed now, which all talks about the different substyles and categorizes as type A and B and so on, which is quite sympathetic to existing studies, but kind of takes what I think are the best parts of most of the studies into an overarching typology that's more universal and easier to add to across time. So I hope to be more future-proof. And then the middle type, which is the chemical coding or the glass analysis. So a similar principle really, and this is what I'm going to talk about mainly, is what I noted was that there seems to be 2 major approaches to coding glass, except of course for the glasses that are named after a place or a person. There are 2 main ways. The first being an abbreviation of the main trace elements or minor elements that make up a specific signature of glass. So an example of this would be HIMT, which is H standing for high, I representing iron, M magnesium, and T titanium. So it's just abbreviation of the words. This is a good system because it tells you if something's high or low in a particular element. But one of the setbacks is that you kind of need to know the system. It doesn't automatically tell you that I stands for iron, which is usually represented by Fe as a chemical signature. And it doesn't tell you necessarily if you're talking about, say, a mineral-based or plant-based, plant ash-based glass, or indeed it doesn't run in the same format if you were talking about a potash or lead glass, for example. Now, the more recent approach, of course, follows a more scientific model of using the chemical codes, such as actually using Fe. So it would be M for mineral, so it differentiates between the mineral, and V for vegetable, so the plant ash, Na, so soda-based glass, and then it would say Fe, iron, Mn, magnesium, and Ti, titanium. The problem I see with this technique is, unlike the first, it doesn't indicate if a particular recipe is high or low in that particular element that makes it unusual. And you come into difficulty then when you're trying to differentiate between several, let's say, plant ash glasses, and subcategorizing. So as the technology improves and we can get greater detail about these really trace elements, and we can subdivide these main glasses, this is where I see some kind of symbol for high, medium, or average, between, and low is going to become really useful. So what I've done is I've essentially taken the element from the first, which indicates high or low, but then used the format of the second in my coding system, and I've created a fantasy example of this just to show you how this would work. Is so you've got your mineral glass M and A, that's high in iron, high in manganese, and high in titanium. But say you found tiny traces, one's particularly high in, say, copper, one's got average levels of copper, and one's particularly low. This is how you might then add onto that. Copper's not a great example, I know, but just sort of an idea of how this might work. And then in a key, you would have then what is the standard relative high, medium, or low for that particular element, or whether it be minor or trace, or major, in fact. So this is the idea. I'd really like some feedback on whether this works from the scientific community, if they like this, if this is something that perhaps could be employed more widely. But the idea would be, for me, is that it's something that you don't necessarily need to know the glass type straight away to just know what the signature is by reading it. So I thought that was quite nice. The third coding system is all to do with colours, and I haven't started this at all yet. And I'll talk very briefly at the end of the concept for that, but it's not as important as, I think, the typology and the chemical signatures. So technical analysis and recording, this is where I've got so far with the typology of actually putting my key types into their typology. And as you can see, type A, this is, you've got very different cross sections. So if you see the cross section and the sketch, you've got circular, you've got peaked, you've got domed and flat. That becomes very relevant, I think, when you understand manufacturing techniques of different styles, which I will talk about in a moment. But of my current collection, I have about 33% of them are of this A type, which is classified as plain or undecorated. Type B is my biggest type, my biggest selection of types, and that's 65% of 198 fragments that I have. And as you can see, all of these cross sections are circular. So this is, again, relevant when I talk about manufacturing techniques. And then these are the others, basically. So in other collections, you'll find these different types in far greater quantities, but types C through to G are very sort of few and far between. And as you can see, all of them, except from the G, are of the flat cross section at the bottom, peaked or layered. And G is relevant because this is not a regular circular cross section. This is actually a coil type, which I'll talk about as the third manufacturing type. So this indicates to me that it's probably post 19th century. So I think possibly intrusive. So manufacturing techniques. So I think that there's three major techniques for making bangles that may be period specific. I think that there may be some overlap in different regions and time periods, but generally speaking, I think type 1, which produce circular cross sections and are the most manual, are the earliest. And this makes up most of my type A's and all of my type B's from Siraf. So I couldn't find any footage or imagery of someone actually still making a bangle in this way from glass anymore. So what you see here is someone cold working with lacquer or lac, which is a modern type of bangle. So you wouldn't have someone using their hands they're like this with molten glass, but I think it definitely represents a similar technique to how my bangles with cross sections are made. So you take a cane and you sort of twist it into a shape that is bangle shaped, a circular shape, and therefore you produce a thick seam. And you have to produce the twisted type in this manner. So you would twist 1 or up to 4 canes and then do this, and then perhaps use some kind of implement to spin it out to get your desired shape, or perhaps you'd use a sort of mold to pop it over to get a similar shape. But therefore, these are very, you'd have to be quite technically proficient to do so. So there's this high skill level. It takes a longer time. They have to be made individually. It's very manual or labour intensive compared to the later techniques. And so it produces plainer looking bangles, but I think actually perhaps more valuable because they're probably fewer produced in this way. And then you've got type 2, which I'm not sure when came in, but I believe came in later, which is what I've called spun. And what you do is you get a bit of glass, molten glass from the fire, off a poker or something similar, and then you sort of spin it out to get a kind of fat donut shape, and you drop it onto one of these kind of spinner shapes, I guess, these cone shapes. And these little cone shapes are spun with wire or string, so that when you drop the molten glass onto them, it spins it out to your desired size and shape of a bangle. And so they create much more uniform shaped and sized bangles. They are quicker to make, easier, lower skill level, and you can mass produce them much easier. As you can see, these ladies are just tying tons of them together and they look pretty uniform. And it's a seamless technique. And this is what produces the flat inside. So whether it is peaked or domed or flat, I expect it's primarily made in this manner. And this is the type that you find highly decorated, more than the first type or the later type, which type 3 I've called coiled. And I believe this came into being in around the 19th century. And this is still handmade to a certain extent, but much, much more mass produced. And as you can kind of see from the picture, you get some molten glass, you get a trail of that, a very fine trail, attach it onto what is essentially a large metallic tube or pipe that is spinning extremely fast. And so it creates a very fine uniform coil shape. So it makes loads of them in one go, and this cools, and then you can see someone then cuts the cooled coil with a diamond cutter to create these really perfect fine bangles that are then taken as a sort of cottage industry by women in houses, who then heat up over open fire this little break to reconnect it so that it appears visually seamless, but there is a seam if you hold it up to the light. So those are 3 core styles, and I have at least 3 that I have identified of the third that I believe to be intrusive or perhaps surface finds. So yes, I should quickly say something about this methodology. So first and foremost, I would like to say this. Unfortunately, due to COVID, my research has been set back now for about 6 months of analysis that I should have been able to undertake by now, that I haven't. So due to the ongoing restrictions and limitation on access to equipment, all the SEM analysis that has been so far undertaken has been done so by my supervisor, Dr. Andrew Meek, from those that I have been analysing and selecting. I therefore suggest that any very technical questions regarding the approach or SEM in particular be better directed towards him at this time via email. I think he is actually listening in on this talk, so he may also be able to answer some of these more technical questions directly. So apologies for that. The other thing I would like to say is that at some point we will be sending some off for Greater LA ICP-MS, that's a laser ablation inductively coupled plasma mass spectrometry analysis, but due to limitations we can't do any of that yet. The other thing I would like to inform the viewers of is that this sample was examined and analysed in a Hitachi S3700 VP SEM using the following operational conditions: high vacuum model greater than 1 PA, 20 kV, 0 to 10 keV spectral range, 2.30 Na probe current, and a 150-second counting time. Quantitative analysis was carried out using an attached Oxford Instruments EDX spectrometer, and the results are presented of the average 2 to 3 area analyses. The analyses were calibrated using pure elements, mineral and oxide standards, and Corning A glass standard was analysed to check that this calibration was producing the correct results. This setup resulted in detection limits for most metal oxides of around 0.1%. Detection limits were calculated using a spectrum synthesis program on Oxford Instruments AZ Tech analyzer software. So there you have it. So far we've analysed in this manner around 60 fragments. That's about 30% of the total group. I do know that some are potentially not bangles. I think could be parts of vessels such as handles and rims and that sort of thing. But we haven't had a chance to go through those that are grouping as vessel glass from Swan's previous analysis yet, to see if those are correlating with those that I visually identified as potentially not actually bangles. So perhaps for a future talk. But as I've just mentioned, Caroline Swan in 2017 and others analysed a collection of glass from Siraf, primarily vessels with a few, I think 8 bangles. And so we've mapped our results against hers. And what she found is Group A and Group B are the 2 primary glass types from Siraf of the vessels, which are either locally or regionally produced. The bangles were rather disparate and different, and we have found much the same. Something particular to note here is the one on its own that is the light blue one that has a square on it around it. That one was identified as a bangle from South Asia by Swan. I therefore expected that we might find at least around 1/8 of our collection at the British Museum to perhaps be of South Asian origin. Now, one of the things that we found from all of those that we've analysed so far is that all of them are of plant ash, no mineral soda glasses at all. Now that is, I guess, within keeping of the period and the place. You would expect most Middle Eastern glasses of the Islamic period to be plant ash based. But it is interesting because of this identification of South Asian glass, which is the mineral ray, high alumina. And it's also interesting because we did think that because the majority are very dark, sort of black looking glass, that we'd get a lot of mixed colours from earlier recycled Roman glasses in my collection. That does not seem to be the case at all. In fact, I should probably say that it's very interesting to see that the blacks seem to be of quite a complex recipe, which is intentional. So I'll talk about that in a second. But of the South Asian glass, I was very interested to see that Swan's analysis had identified that single bangle as having the same chemical signature as a green coal stick glass coal stick from the collection, so in the Corning Museum. This is the central one. Now, from a visual analysis, at least two that I have that are coal sticks on the left, you see, visually looked like a match. So I was very surprised to see that they are not at all, that ours are definitely plant ash based. The other thing to note is that the three that I visually identified as late, probably post-19th century intrusive, also have proven to be so from the chemical analysis, which is interesting. So mainly because they have zinc, but it's good to know that there is that correlation as well. And this is the collection of others that we have also analysed, and they are very disparate. So I will not be talking about this now, this is what we expected, but I will be talking now a bit more about a selection of type A's and type B's that we analysed. So they are all of dark glass, there are 8 of each, and so they have visual similarities. As you can see, one of the interesting things that we found is that these sort of dark black-brown recipes that are emerging are not produced by high levels of colorant, such as manganese or cobalt, as we thought might be the case, or mixtures of many strong colors from recycling, but actually seem to be intentional additives of high iron. And so you're producing intentional dark browns, dark greens, or a sort of black appearance of glass. That may have significance because those 3 colours are very auspicious within Islamic culture. So potentially something of interest there. And here they are grouped within my coding system. So one of the things that we found is that although there's a greater groupings, of course, emerging than the selection of those very different, unusual coloured ones that do not come from groups A and B, we can tentatively say that this initial review suggests a range of possible origins from Mesopotamia, the Eastern Mediterranean or Syrian region in particular, and Central Asia. So more time and analysis is of course necessary to confirm this and interpret further. But as you can see, this is how my coding system would potentially work. And those in this collection, in this grouping from the Eastern Mediterranean also seem to be high titanium, although some others we've analysed are not. So here we have the regional groups. And what's very interesting to me is that the type A's that come under the same category, although you've got a mixture here of some being potentially from Mesopotamia and some from the Eastern Mediterranean, the ones that are very weathered and quite thick set and were actually heavier do seem to be of a different origin than those that are not and look to be visually of a similar looking glass. So that's really interesting in itself. And also that the twist style from Central Asia is also rather different. The one at the top right from Mesopotamia perhaps doesn't belong in this group at all because it is actually a blue glass with white cane twisted in, which gives it a different category. So I may have to recategorize that. And then finally, something to briefly mention is that with the colours, I think there is potential to map out changes and across time and place of colours, and to potentially make a link between different styles and periods and chemical recipes. And this is a sort of quick look at 3 regionally close sites that were looked at by Spear that were occupied at different points, just to visualise how the colours differ. And of course, with a proper Pantone colour system coding, it will also help us understand what's the difference between 3 different dark blues, and also to understand the colours when there is no visual image attached to a bangle, for example. So that kind of thing I will be talking about more at a later date. And again, other aspects that I discuss, you can find those on my ResearchGate or academia pages as below, which is linked to my YouTube page. So really now I'd just like to thank the organisers for inviting me to talk, especially Daniela, who's been fantastic at reorganising this at late notice. All my supervisors, of course, and in particular Andrew Meek, without whom you would not have a presentation today. So thank you so much, Andrew of the British Museum Scientific Department. Also Ellen Swift, my supervisor from Kent, and Sinjin Simpson, also secondary supervisor from the Middle East Department of the British Museum, who allows me access to the Siraf collection. And finally, a special thank you also to Dr. Ian Freestone, as I mentioned earlier, for allowing me to take part in his MA course on glass and glazes. So without further ado, I guess, are there any questions that I might be able to answer for you?